Beer is far and away the most popular alcoholic beverage on the planet. And the oldest. Some anthropologists even contend that beer kick-started civilization itself. When our Neolithic ancestors first began to form communities and cultivate land, they grew grain and made a basic beer. Today, we down over 120 billion litres of the stuff every year. That's twice the amount of water that flows into Sydney Harbour every day. Laid end-to-end in cans, that beer would reach the moon and back 35 times. Countless nations claim the ancient brew as an intrinsic part of their culture and heritage, part of what makes them who they are. But despite our continuing global love affair with beer and its important place in our lives, how many of us actually know much about it? Or even what's in it?
Barley, I suppose.
Maybe salt.
Yeast, maybe.
Water.
The time has come to set the record straight on our beloved amber nectar. From pouring and storing, to tasting and judging, collecting and cooking, brewing and testing, to farming and selling. This is beer, an insider's guide. There are around 50 styles of beer that can be broadly categorised into distinct groups. Pilsners are brewed with rich malts and spicy hops. Basic lagers are lighter bodied, and Bocks are the heaviest lager style. The spectrum for ales begins with pale varieties and more bitter amber ales, to medium-bodied brown and dark styles. At the top of the tree, strong ale, porter and stout are rich, heavy, generally higher alcohol beers, made with highly roasted malts to produce chocolate, coffee-like characters. The main difference between ales and lagers is in the yeast and fermenting temperatures. Here, in the heartlands of consumption, we drink 5 times more beer than wine. But our knowledge base between the two is probably the reverse. That is about to change.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Beer Appreciation Dinner tonight. The purpose of tonight is to really see beer in a different light, to actually savour the flavour. Tonight we're into some serious beer drinking, but I mean serious in terms of flavour rather than volume. It's about actually appreciating the flavours that come from breweries and the flavours from the kitchen, created by the chefs. That's what tonight's Beer Appreciation Dinner is about.
Brewmaster Bill Taylor travels the country spreading the amber gospel to intrigued audiences.
Well, I like these dinners because everyone loves beer, but it's surprising how many people don't actually know a great deal. There's lots of myths and folklores out there, half-truths that have been spread around beer, and in the absence of real facts and knowledge, these things just flourish.
New appreciation and respect for beer is creating this thirst for knowledge as well, right around the world. For most, the learning curve is a steep one. Still, only a small percentage of beer drinkers are aware that, like wine, a good beer is the result of brewers overcoming the vagaries of the seasons. The start of every glass has its roots right here, firmly planted in terra firma. Malted barley provides the colour, body and soul of beer. But that unmistakable thirst-quenching quality that only beer can deliver is created a world away from sunburnt grain fields in pristine, temperate environments. In just a narrow window of latitude, climate and topography, beer's magical seasoning thrives.
A lot of brewers describe the hop as a flavouring or an essence, or like a cook uses particular herbs to flavour their food. The brewers using hops basically do the same thing. We export probably 70% of our products, so we are putting hops on the world market. Obviously, we think our hops are better than what they produce in the Northern Hemisphere.
The first stage of the autumnal hop harvest is to cut the trained vines from both the top and bottom of the 5-metre trellises.
When we're growing a full crop, and we need to put up about 1.5 million strings, so it's a big operation, and we employ about approximately 100 people to do the training. We cannot train the hops too early, otherwise the daylight length won't be correct for the flowering mechanism to be switched on. From there, the flower will set and a cone will start developing from that. When you break the cone open, it looks like pollen, but it's not actually pollen. They're tiny little sacs of alpha acid, and that is the component that the brewers are extracting or using to bitter the beer.
Hops are a member of the stinging nettle family. Before they took over as the preferred bittering agent of beer, other natural herbs like myrtle, heather and ivy were used.
Brewers are constantly looking for ways of getting an edge in the market, especially in the premium market. They're quite often using some hops as ordinary bittering agents, and then they're getting aromas and more flavours and spices into their beers by using other hops as well. They're being added late in the brew, and they're giving some nice character to some of the beer.
The majority of brewing hops today, like this popular Pride of Ringwood variety, are dried and pelletised in vacuum packs to preserve their freshness, flavour and aroma when they arrive at the breweries. As the British Empire expanded throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, the establishment of a brewery was always one of the first priorities for the new settlements. In Australia, an environment like they had never encountered before, the first commercial brewery was built halfway along the colony's main thoroughfare, the Parramatta River. Today, the region is known as Kissing Point, and plaques scattered throughout the district identify the site of the nation's first brewery. In this harsh environment, hop and barley crops failed more often than not. And even now, 200 years on, the elements still have a profound effect on yield. Only a narrow time frame exists every spring to get the most out of a barley harvest. Levelling the crop will take just 11 days, but the 23,000-tonne stockpile will keep major brewers in pale malt used in lagers for an entire year. Not all barley is suitable for malting. Brewers claim only premium quality grain, which makes up less than 10% of an annual harvest.
It's a pretty tough plant, and mostly you'll get a reasonable yield off it, even in a tough year. To be able to harvest it, we've got to get it down to the acceptable moisture level, and we can't do that if we get cool weather. It just wants a bit of real heat, 30+ degree heat to dry the last bit of moisture out of it. The barley that we're harvesting here will end up making about approximately 8 million stubbies, which sounds pretty good to me.
As the colonies grew with the arrival of free settlers, most skilled workers were able to adapt to their new world, but brewers battled hard. Poor quality ingredients, wild yeasts, and huge variations in temperature made it almost impossible to brew decent tasting beer on a regular basis. Today, we would not accept our favourite beers varying in taste from one week to the next, but it requires tremendous skill and attention to detail to maintain that consistency. We excuse winemakers for producing seasonal variations, but brewers are expected to get it right every time. The guarantee of beer flavour today begins with the treatment of raw barley in here, the malt house.
The expectation among beer drinkers is that when they order a glass of particular beer, they have very strong association as to what it should present like and what it should taste like.
After the barley is cleaned, it is soaked for 21 hours. Maltsters call it steeping.
The steeping effectively triggers the germination. During that stage, we actually supply grain with oxygen to maintain all its bodily function, like respiration and reproductive system. All those things are, in fact, part of the whole germination process.
When the grain is thoroughly soaked, it is sent to the germination box. In a humid environment, the grain is kept moving to keep it loose, and a fine mist of water combines to simulate the conditions of a natural underground germination. After 3 or 4 days, rootlets appear, and the chemical composition of the grain changes. Enzymes are released that convert starch to sugar. The root growth is arrested by gentle kiln drying. The longer and hotter the drying, the darker the malt, the darker the beer, and the more intense the flavour.
The grain doesn't appear too different. It's still whole grain, but the internal structure has changed completely. It's been broken down.
With the malt now stable and ready to be delivered to the brewery, there is one final check before it leaves the malt house. Every batch is chemically analysed for its moisture and protein content, colour and viscosity, and then checked against the delivery specifications of the client. To ensure that guaranteed consistency of beer flavour, nothing is left to chance. The man now in charge of getting this precious cargo to the brewmasters freely admits he's a little sketchy about what happens with the malt after his job is done.
I have made home brews a few times when I've had time to do it. So I've got a rough idea what goes on.
The roughest thing John has to contend with is the 100,000 kilometres of bitumen he traverses hauling malt every year. Water is the major component of beer. It is the medium in which the malt extract is dissolved, hops are boiled, and yeast lives and creates fermentation. Groundwater contains varying levels of dissolved minerals like calcium and magnesium, and ions such as sulfates and carbonates. Distilled water, like pure rainwater, is in fact of little use to the brewer. With its high mineral content drawn from rivers, lakes and dams, filtered groundwater is most commonly used to brew beer. Without minerals in the water, the enzymes that trigger the natural biochemical reactions in brewing will not activate properly. The fourth and final ingredient that contributes to the unique flavour of beer is all around us, in the air we breathe, spores floating on the wind too small for us to see. Yeast. It is so important to the flavour profile that all breweries keep master strains of their cultures in yeast banks in England as a safeguard against fire. They can replicate every other flavour component of beer except yeast. Only with the aid of powerful optics can we see what all the fuss is about.
What yeast does is convert sugar to ethanol, alcohol and carbon dioxide, and this is a reaction which a lot of organisms can do, but which is usually only an emergency reaction. And although yeast does use oxygen in the normal way, it also does this reaction all the time, just the way yeast works. So even if there is oxygen, unlike other organisms, yeast will continue to break down sugar to alcohol. It's a very effective organism. It can whip away sugar to ethanol very fast, but actually, that's actually being wasteful if it's got oxygen there. I guess the reason it does it is that this drives away everything else.
With all four major ingredients at their disposal, hops, barley, yeast and water, enter the brewmasters. These are the true craftsmen who manipulate the blends and quantities, times and temperatures to put their own signature on the 50 beer styles of the world, spread across 30,000 brands from 5,000 breweries. At the height of production, millions of bottles of beer a day leave the major breweries. Every single one of them made with that basic 5,000-year-old process and the four key ingredients: malted barley, hops, yeast and water. With not a drop of wine in the room, matching beer to food is at the centre of beer appreciation dinners. A lager and pilsner to start the evening, heavier ales and porters with the meat dishes and desserts. Learning about the new world of beer flavours and their gastronomic value is one thing, but question time is when most beer knowledge is served up.
Why do different beers come in different coloured bottles?
Oh, that's a great question. The reason that most beer bottles are brown is in fact because the brown glass filters the light. Beer is susceptible to light. It will be affected, so by putting beer in a brown bottle, you've effectively wrapped the beer in the equivalent of sunglasses. Some of the beers which are in other glass colours have to do with marketing and presentation. Green is often associated with premium beers. It looks a bit more elegant, but I have to say it's not actually as good as filtering out the light as the brown bottle.
Bill, does beer go off?
Yeah, beer can go off. It's a natural product. It has a shelf life, and it's always better to drink fresh beer. Fresh beer is best.
Bill, what are the pros and cons of beer in stubbies as opposed to cans?
People really can't tell the difference between beer from a can or beer from a bottle if you pour the beer in a glass. It actually tastes the same.
Bill Taylor likes nothing more than to debunk many of the myths associated with beer, and he saves his best until last.
I actually tell people how to pour a beer. The amount of feedback I've had about that, what they've been able to do to show people how to present a beer and pass that on, it's just tremendous how that flows forward. The general presentation of a beer goes something like this. The typical tilt, pour and foam, almost as an afterthought. I like to present beer a little bit differently. So rather than tilting the glass, I actually pour the foam in, keep the glass vertical. And my motto is, let's create the foam at the bottom of the glass. I wait for half a minute, maybe 3/4 of a minute, and I let that foam settle. The beer is draining away from the foam is becoming more dense. It's almost crusting slightly, becoming drier, becoming more stable, so that when I go back to the beer and I top it up, you'll see a very different type of foam in the glass. So as I pour in now and bring the beer to the top of the glass, I have a foam that sits just a little proud of the glass. The bubbles are lovely and small and tight and dense.
Per capita, Czechs are the biggest beer drinkers in the world, downing around 160 litres each per year. Behind them are the Germans and the English. Australians are fourth overall at 90 litres per head. A good portion of that beer is purchased here. The busiest bottle shop on the world's driest inhabited continent is right opposite the beach.
There's no point putting them in the fridge, having them cold, they just go too quickly. We also have people come down with truckloads. We had a guy come down today and he picked up a couple of pallets. So he comes down, we just load him up out the back with the forklift and away he goes.
When Aussies are thirsty, a staggering 120,000 litres of beer will move through these doors every week. If it's an advertised special, it's standing room only.
They'll actually purchase for their friends who live many miles away. So what they'll do is they'll know that they're coming to within our area. Their friends will say, great, grab me a couple of cartons at the same time, and they'll end up driving home with 20 cartons.
And what are they buying?
3 beers, lager, lager and lager.
From 4 natural ingredients: barley, hops, yeast and water, a rich golden liquid emerged that has been a nourishment, a thirst quencher and a celebratory beverage enjoyed by billions of people the world over. And right now, thousands of years after that accidental discovery, beer is being appreciated like never before. Enjoying a beer means different things to different people. In the 21st century, the world's oldest recipe is reveling in a new age of respect and appreciation. Bold new flavours appealing to curious palates. It is the age of the beer connoisseur. What is it about the taste of beer we enjoy so much? After all, it's 9/10 water and 75% of its flavour is in its aroma. The complex chemical reaction that takes place between its other key ingredients, malt and yeast, are the foundation of that unique beer taste. In the 8th century, monks began adding hops to their brews to add bitterness. The only significant change to the original beer recipe. Even today, nothing more is added. With more than 1 billion beers a year under his belt as a chief brewer, Bill Taylor has a presence at hundreds of thousands of parties, pubs, clubs and gatherings every year. But curiously, unlike his high-profile winemaking counterparts, he lives in relative anonymity, like most beer professionals.
It's a bit like taking the familiar for granted. We're so used to it, we expect it to be everywhere, that we actually probably don't appreciate it quite enough. We can see some people taking much more interest these days. There's a lot of serious beer lovers out there, but equally, we don't need to turn beer drinking into some science. It is about fun and sociability. The wonderful thing about beer is it's actually a world of flavour. It's got diversity. It's like a tapestry of flavour. And we can offer the consumer, whatever their preference, quite a lot.
Everyone has their favourite. Yet all beer drinkers have one thing in common, according to the aficionados.
I think we drink beer at absolutely mind-numbing temperatures. To me, and I think to most professionals in the brewing industry, the optimum temperature for a lager-style beer would be somewhere around 5 or 6 degrees centigrade. In general, we're drinking at less than 2 degrees centigrade. The net result of that is, with a product like a lager that is low in flavour, low in aroma, you suppress the flavour and aroma. And frankly, all you're getting is an ice-cold drink.
To turn that ice-cold drink mentality around and take on the rising threat from the wine and spirit industries, beer heavyweights are waging a massive but subtle education campaign. And for 1 week every year, these ultimate beer connoisseurs gather in Ballarat to set the beer benchmarks for the year ahead. Fittingly, this hedonistic gathering takes place in a town that celebrates a rich beer history. The gold rush of the 1850s left a legacy of some of the most impressive pubs and colonial buildings in Australia. It is here that the world's most astute beer judges meet to determine the winners of the largest annual international beer competition for professional brewers.
Let's get this show on the road. We okay, guys? We've got to get this moving. The reason for that being is we've got a whole mishmash of beers today. We've got wood-aged fruit beers, we've got wood-aged stouts, we've got smoked porters, we've got all sorts of different styles and types that I think are going to take a little bit longer and require a little bit of discussion. So I've asked Pete to set up 3 cider beers. So we'll run an amber ale, a dark ale, and we've got a Scotch ale. So it gives us that chance to calibrate the palates, you know, get the brain into gear, get the Colgate out of the mouth, etc.
That's right, it's 9 a.m. And while most people are munching on their toast, these guys are tucking into the toasty character of a smoked porter for breakfast. The first of 502 beers they will taste for the week. And unlike their wine counterparts, beer judges don't spit it out.
Well, there's a couple of very good reasons. There are a lot of strong similarities between wine judging and beer judging. Where we differ is we do actually swallow a small amount of beer, and there are very good reasons for that. If you're talking about the 4 or 5 basic tastes, one of those tastes we're assessing in beer is this character called bitterness. Now, to assess this after bitterness and bitterness character, it's right at the back of the throat, the epiglottal region of your throat, and the back of the palate. Now, short of gargling, there's only one way I know of assessing that particular character, is swallowing the beer. Also, think about it. If we're judging 80 or 90 beers a day, we're not about to be drinking 8 or 9 litres of beer a day.
In putting their palates and vocabularies to the test, these battle-hardened experts use terms rarely associated with beer.
citrus,
caramel,
toffee, raisiny,
honey,
roast barley, leathery,
peaty smoky.
It was raisiny, as Nick has mentioned. There was toffee in there. There was great balance in the beer, great complexity in it, but it was just knocked off by that age.
I think that's part of the character of these styles. I don't mind that oxidised toffee age sort of note that's coming through on it. To me, I often describe it as like an English old ale. It's something I would actually expect in some of those beers. So it's there, but it doesn't bother me. So I gave it an 18. It's a hell of a way to start the morning, though. Yeah. Oh, you got the best job in the world. I mean, that's the principal reaction. And how the hell do you judge beer? Anybody can judge beer. It's just a beer, isn't it? That's the reaction we get. And that's part of the educational process that we're doing with these beer awards. We want to move people away from this notion of it's just a beer. It's not just a beer.
Trust me, it's not very easy at all. I mean, I can equate this to running a marathon very easily. I mean, I'm not a runner by natural form, but I can really relate to physically drained, emotionally drained, psychologically drained.
Richard doesn't deny, though, the perks of the job are hard to beat.
It's a beer cocktail party, if you would. So instead of cocktails, we have beer tales. So we have a few beers, we have a few ales, and we tell a few tales. You don't have to finish all of your beer if you don't want to. I want everyone to walk out of here. You know what I mean.
Chuck Hahn is one of the world's great beer connoisseurs, and he likes nothing more than to share his knowledge around.
Every brewer really wants to make the style of beer that they enjoy drinking. And I think I didn't see that happening in Australia.
So he decided to brew his own, and he named it after the nation's beer pioneer.
A darker beer now. This is the James Squire Amber Ale. So I would encourage... He was a convict. He was a real rebel. He was an entrepreneur, and he was Australia's first brewer. He had to leave his wife and 3 kids back in the UK as a convict coming across, but by the time he died about 30 years later, he had fathered 8 or 9 children by 3 different women when the ratio of men to women was about 10 to 1.
James Squire died a wealthy man in 1822. His was the biggest funeral held during the first 4 decades of settlement. He lies in an unmarked grave, but one historian who spent 3 years transcribing headstones in the nation's oldest cemeteries came across an inscription that referred to him.
Ye who wish to lie here, drink Squire's beer. So not everyone thought it was a good drop.
But there were plenty of influential people in the early days of settlement who found the convict brewer's tipple particularly appealing. He became a welcome guest at Government House. Governor King, in particular, encouraged the emancipated Squire to pursue his brewing interests because of the corruption and social effect rum was having on the colony. Brewing was considered a high priority, and every effort was made to help boost the fledgling industry. At the government's expense, an entire shipload of hops was transported from England and given to Squire. King himself set up the first government brewery that turned out to be an abject failure and was put up for tender just 2 years after it began production. It was always assumed King's Brewery had been lost forever, buried by the construction of modern buildings. A recent historical investigation challenges that. Study of transaction journals and diary entries suggest this dairy on the grounds of Old Government House might in fact be the remains of the nation's first brewery. No one is denying beer was consumed here. Archaeologists recently uncovered a number of beer bottles set in clay underneath the floorboards of the cottages. While ales were the only beer style brewed until lager came onto the scene in the mid-1800s, nothing about the way beer is made has changed for hundreds of years. Those time-honoured traditions continue today.
Now, brewing's not rocket science. Whether we're making 2 million stubbies a day or a home brew, the first stage that all brewers need to do is mill the grain, ready for mashing. When we mill the grain, we don't want to end up with a fine paste when it's mixed with water, so it's a rather coarse grind. Once we've got the milled grain, we mix it with water. Here in this vessel, the brewers call a mash tun. The water's at carefully chosen temperature, around 60 degrees. We take it up to higher temperatures during the next hour and a half or two to release the natural enzymes from the grain that break down the starch in the malt and creating this lovely, rich, golden coloured and very nutritious malt extract. We call that wort. We filter the wort through the husk material from the grain. The leftover grains are actually sold off for cattle feed. But we collect this wort in the brewing kettle, and it's here that we boil the brew. We add a very special ingredient, hops, as a seasoning, like these Pride of Ringwood hops from Bushy Park. We use tons of malt when we brew a beer, but we only use kilograms of hops. We add them right here in the kettle. After the boil, which takes about an hour and a half, we're ready to pump the wort to the fermenter. But before we do that, we need to chill it down. We do this by using a heat exchanger, and a heat exchanger is really a device that's a series of plates. On one side of these plates we have a hot liquid passing, and on the other a cold. They literally exchange heat. In our case it's the hot wort that's being chilled, and on the way to the fermenter we add the yeast. The fermentation takes place in very large closed stainless steel tanks. To get an appreciation of what's actually happening in a fermenter, we have a fermentation in progress right here. Now this is the yeast that we actually add to a fermenter. It's a thick, buff-coloured paste, and we put that in to start the fermentation. At the bottom of the fermenter here we can see that there's some yeast there. Above it we've got the wort that's being fermented, the foam on the top, and as the alcohol's being created there's carbon dioxide being given off, and this is the bubbling that you can see here at the top. It's a warm process, it's getting hot as it goes, so we often wrap the fermenters in a refrigeration sleeve to keep it cool and get a consistent fermentation time after time. Up until this stage we still don't have beer. That's created by the action of the yeast in the fermenting tank over the period of about a week. The beer then goes into maturation, a cold process at sub-zero temperatures to fully develop the flavour of the beer. And then we're ready to bring it to the beer filter. And it's in this filter that we use a substance called diatomaceous earth. It's the fossilised remains of prehistoric microorganisms. We need something that small to filter out the yeast particles. And then we create our lovely bright sparkling beer that's ready for the can, the keg or the bottle.
The brewing industry is changing with the times. Traditional beers are still the high-volume sellers, but new styles are constantly being developed to meet the demands of today's more adventurous palates. Many believe it's the most exciting period in the history of brewing. For the students preparing to launch into this new world of beer, doing the legwork for judges at the Australian International Beer Awards is a handy addition to the CV.
They take the whole procedure very, very seriously. I mean, a lot of people can think beer is a humorous topic sometimes, but these are major awards, very serious awards, and they work very hard at getting everything right.
There's a very good reason why the judging takes place here. The University of Ballarat is at the forefront of beer academia.
We're researching enzymes and proteins and how they contribute to forming beer head, beer foam, and how they contribute to haze formation.
I'm working with digital imaging, using that to assess grain quality.
We get a whole range of students' backgrounds. A number of students are already working in breweries, particularly a couple of the microbreweries, and they come along just to increase their technical expertise. We also have students who are looking for a career change, and a group of students that really do just enjoy the product and just wish to learn more about it.
When he's not grooming the next generation of brewing professionals, Dr. Aldred is in charge of the strict quality control of the judging for the beer awards. Out of sight of the connoisseurs, students give the serving glasses a thorough once-over to ensure they are spotless. And the beers are poured the same way all 502 times.
And the important thing is that we present the beer with a good head, because that's one of the criteria which the judges judge a particular beer on. So we try and pour nice and consistently and evenly as possible.
When it's time to get down to business, the techniques used to judge beer are similar to wine. Each glass is assessed on a 20-point scale, broken up into 5 different categories.
This is beer number 175 we're now judging, and it is cranberry.
To many, it would seem like the dream job. So, how do you get into it?
You've got to have experience in the industry. You've got to have some form of technical knowledge. You've got to have brewed in the brewing industry. You've got to have worked as a maltster. Secondly, with our judges, we choose judges on the basis of their palate.
These palates are worth millions of dollars to the winning breweries that waste no time getting the word out to the marketplace about the gold medal quality of their beers. And Judgment Day is looming. Three weeks after the hazy memories of Ballarat and the judging, it's time for the winners of the Academy Awards of Beer to be announced in Melbourne. The who's who of brewing fills the room in anticipation of taking home one of the 12 championship trophies. But before the winners are announced, several thousand more opinions will be given on the contenders' beers just across town. Part of the awards ceremony every year is a public tasting festival, where most of the entered beers are on offer. In this heady environment, where as much paraphernalia as beer is on show, beer connoisseurs in the making rub shoulders with industry professionals. To dyed-in-the-wool lager drinkers, the festival is often the first foray into the much wider world of beer styles. For women in particular, the whole experience can be something of a revelation.
Very nice. A lot of women came along, you know, with their husbands, partners or whatever, and they said, oh, look, we don't know much about beer and we don't really like it. Or they thought they didn't, because I think they thought that was the right thing to say. And halfway through this, I say, hey, I think this is fantastic. I didn't think beer could taste like this.
I don't know much about beer, but I just know that from tasting the different beers that they certainly taste different.
It doesn't really matter what people drink anymore. If you like it, you drink it.
And that's music to the ears of everyone in the running for the Beer Awards. With the major prizes drawing closer, nervous tension in the ballroom keeps the pace up in the back room. More than 70 breweries have entered their beers tonight, and after 3 hours of presentations, it's down to the final 2 coveted beer trophies.
The champion Australasian brewery is Malt Shovel Brewery Limited.
It's always good to be able to tell people that your beer has been recognised as one of the best at the Australian International Beer Awards.
Congratulations.
It's a real struggle. I mean, people are starting to drink beer for flavor, and they're starting to taste beer rather than just throw it back for refreshment and relaxation. This is really a campaign we've been working on for over 10 years, to get people to actually taste what they're drinking.
So, after a year spent agonising over quantities and temperatures, blends and techniques, one person is about to be recognised as the brewer of the perfect beer.
Nor'Wester Pale Ale, Dux Deluxe, New Zealand. Richard Fife from Dux Deluxe in New Zealand receives the trophy. And very proudly so.
Being a small fish in a large sea of the brewing world, this is a privilege and an honour to stand head and shoulders above greats that we've seen come and go in a number of years of international brewing competitions. And finally, I feel now all my hard work is paid off.
Beer's renaissance is being driven by people like Richard Fife. Brewers handcrafting bold flavours and styles that appeal to a rapidly growing market of genuine beer connoisseurs.
Cheryl, do you know where my hat is?
Adam and Shirley Murphy's house is a beer shrine, thanks to Adam's obsession that ran out of control a few years ago. When things got too bad, he started giving hundreds of cans away. His plans to create more space in the home, though, backfired horrendously.
I said, well, don't give them away, I'll collect them. And I said, you should start putting shelves up for mine.
I didn't anticipate that at all, and it's taken up a lot of room in the house. We'd probably have in excess of 10 or 11,000. Of those, about 2,500 would be my collection of Australian cans, and the rest would be Shirley's.
And they're not done yet. Emails are flying around the world in the lead up to the Beer Can Collectors social event of the year.
Hey Cheryl, Philip from Austria wants 3 of your Harley-Davidson cans. We're off to Wagga. It's our 25th annual Beer Can Show. It'll be a beauty. We've got well over 120 people coming. So it should be a very interesting show, and there should be some very interesting cans for swap down there.
Passionate collectors like Adam and Shirley,
I gave you 50,
who covet beer cans, bottles and memorabilia, to dedicated home and pub brewers, beer judges, brewing historians and plenty more, are fascinated by the wider world of the amber. They all have beer mania. Beer, a four-letter word that means so much to so many. From the Latin bibere, to drink, this ubiquitous beverage has developed its own subculture. The recent surge in interest in all things beer has even created its own literary niche, the beer writer.
There was an email on the desk saying, would you like to be our new beer writer? It was from Australian Gourmet Traveller Wine, and I said, well, I sent one back saying, every day I've been coming into work for 10 years waiting for this email to arrive, and you know, how much do you want for the job?
For new age beer writers, setting the appropriate tone for readers was a real challenge.
I approached beer journalism with a great deal of reticence because I didn't really want to overcomplicate something that brought so much uncomplicated pleasure to me. But as I got into it, I realised that there was no beer journalism around. I mean, Peter Lawler started the first beer column in a major newspaper, like about 5 years ago.
Yeah. I felt like Roy Orbison, you know. I was given the gift, and I had to look after it.
Peter's prose now stands alongside a growing number of beer writing practitioners.
It's not a thing that you would take to the lengths that I guess a lot of writers have taken wine to. It tends to have that egalitarian air to it, you know, that no-nonsense air.
Cheers, big ears.
So, is there any rivalry between beer and wine writers?
All wine writers drink beer. You never see them. And all winemakers drink beer as well. There's not a lot of rivalry. I just don't like them.
From the nation's capital, an economist went one better than beer journalists and focused his entire PhD study on the history of brewing. Among beer aficionados, he's lauded as the nation's only Doctor of Beer. There aren't too many others with that pedigree working for the Federal Treasury.
People always laugh and say, well, you must have enjoyed the primary research and all those sorts of jokes, but once they listen, I think they come to realise that it is a very important topic.
For job satisfaction, though, not even academics of the amber or professional beer writers come close to the brew's ultimate purists.
This is a marvellous beer.
The DIY set.
I simply have the best job in the world. We stand around talking about beer all day for a living.
Vast improvements in the quality and range of ingredients, techniques and packaging have changed amateur brewing forever. For drinkers who still associate home brew with backyard rocket fuel, today's domestic brewmasters have one point to make.
As far as we're concerned, these days we don't make home brew anymore, we make beer. Initially, when homebrew first became popular, little was known about the techniques or even the ingredients for that matter. So what they were producing back then wasn't anywhere near really the sort of quality we're used to today. So it's still something that we tend to combat. People 10 years ago, if you say you wanted to try my home brew, you'd say, no way. But they're soon surprised at the sort of quality that we can produce now.
Like most homebrew suppliers, Sean stocks more than 100 base cans. Using different brewing sugars, malts and hops, up to 100 styles of beer can be made from a single can.
You could literally make beer for the rest of your life and never make the same thing twice.
Among the growing fraternity of homebrewers, one name currently stands above all others. We're about to learn the secrets of a garage beer legend. It's a lazy Sunday afternoon, but for a home brewer, this is precious time that could be spent in the garage. Ken Weedon is the Queensland king of backyard brewers, and he didn't get that reputation by sitting around reading the paper.
See you soon. Make sure you clean up your mess.
Ken is also president of BABS, the Brisbane Amateur Brewers, and this is his beer office. As a mash brewer, he begins with raw grain.
This is where it all starts. Trusty old Makita, trusty old grain mill. Grain goes in here and out it goes. You've got to be a fanatic to be a mash brewer. So now I have the milled grain. This is a mash tun and in it goes. You can make quite good beers out of kits. Now I'm adding 72-degree water to the grain, and this will settle out at 66 degrees, and I'll let it sit for an hour and a half. You can make quite good beers out of extracts. Now that should be quite well mixed there. Just as good as the best imported beers. Now I'll seal it up, but you can make really, really high quality beers from mashing. Next thing we have to do is wash all the sugars out of the grain. So what I'm doing now is sparging. We can't let the grain bed go dry, so I have to keep this level of water above the grain bed all the time. You will get a lot of inconsistency if you don't know what you're doing. It runs off here into the boiling kettle, and that's where we'll add the hops. Unless you're perfectly clean and sanitise everything. These are Australian grown Tettnanger bittering hops. You have no chance. You'll make drain cleaner every time. They'll be going in here for a good 60-minute boil. I would have thrown out maybe 20 or 30 batches in my early years. The boil is now finished, so I have to reduce the temperature as quickly as possible. So I use Godzilla. Anyone can homebrew. I run cold water through this, and it works very effectively. Anyone can make good beer. And in a fortnight's time, this one's coming with me to a very special function, our local Babs meeting. Takes a little bit of dedication.
From the best amateurs to world-renowned chief brewers like Bill Taylor, it's all about dedication when it comes to producing top-quality beer consistently.
The chief brewer role is really a custodial role. I'm looking after the integrity of the beers rather than the day-to-day making of the beers. So the quality of the materials that are going into our beers, the recipes, working with our marketing people, getting feedback from consumers, the design of new beers.
And that's what Bill is up to today.
So we've got 2 ales and 2 lagers this morning.
Researchers at the Tooheys Brewery have created 4 new beers to be evaluated and possibly put into production.
Nice and full-bodied, very malty. Nice deep amber colour too. That's a very good-looking beer, as well as one that's very aromatic and full. Quite a big flavour. What were we actually trying to target on this one? What was the brief about?
This one was about having some late hop character and trying to get some upfront hop aroma.
Yeah.
So it's come through well, but perhaps a bit more, and maybe if I just added another 5 minutes later.
And comments, Jeff?
Comments, I love the overall balance, the bitterness, the maltiness. Great beer, 8.
Major breweries are constantly researching and developing new beers to prepare for the taste trends of the future. Being immersed in this amber world was destiny for Bill. He took a scholarship at a brewery while he was still a student.
Being a young teenage Brisbaneite at the time, I thought a job in a brewery, it sounds pretty good to me, and I put my hand up. Within 12 months, when I'd left the laboratory job that I had started and went and worked looking after the kegging operations of the brewery, I was actually responsible for the keg beer being produced in Queensland, but wasn't old enough to go in a pub to be able to drink it.
Bill cut his teeth at the Castlemaine Perkins Brewery in Brisbane. The company's flagship beer, 4X Bitter, is part of the state's cultural identity. Passion for beer is alive and well in Queensland.
You'd like to come into this room?
So popular is the product, tours of the 4X Brewery are held on the hour most days.
Making the brew takes all of my time. Quality's everything, you know.
The tour is the first of its kind in Australia. Visitors are taken right through every step of the brewing process and the history of beer itself. It's a fast-track beer education.
So if you were to drink 1 6-pack a day, it would take 240 years just to drink 1 tank.
A lot of non-beer drinkers say, I don't like beer, I don't like the taste of it. Well, when there's hundreds of different kinds of beers, I'm sure that they could find one that they like. So it's good to expose them to the process and to let them know that there's more options available to them.
Now for the fun part, what beer would you like to try? Would you like to try the new 3X?
Yes.
3X, yes. Not 4X.
Yeah.
No, 3X. It's the new one being released for our anniversary.
After a complete tour of the brewery, the visitors had worked up quite a thirst. But opinions were divided on the special release beer.
I like this one. Yeah, I like this one too.
Beer consumption peaked during the 18th and 19th centuries. As a staple of the European diet, ale was often consumed with breakfast, lunch and dinner. In Sydney's Rocks district, beer's fascinating social history is celebrated on guided walking tours through the streets of the first European settlement.
One of the more colourful stories associated with beer occurred here at this famous historic pub called the Hero of Waterloo. It was one of Shanghaiing. The publican would do a deal with a ship's captain requiring a crew member. A hapless sailor would come wandering up here. Alcohol would be plied to him. He'd become ripened and drunk, legless up against the bar. The publican would then just pick a lever, the trapdoor would be open, and the poor old drunken soul would fall down to the cellar beneath.
The entryways to some of the many tunnels that ran to the harbour are still there below the pub, and so too the manacles that restrained the more reluctant first-time sailors. Adding even more spice to the story, the tunnels were filled in during the 1960s. One rumour has it to cover evidence of a murder scene. The hotels of the early years of settlement are the source of most of the stories Dee recounts to walkers who join her tours. The pubs remain living history museums.
There's always conjecture as to which hotel is the oldest. We're standing outside the Lord Nelson Hotel. It's had a continuous hotel licence in this building since 1841, and for many, that's enough.
That's one of the main reasons why we in fact purchased the pub some 17 years ago. The history of the hotel and the future we could make of it, it made us interested in maintaining this building.
Blair admits he is a lifelong beer fan, and he was adamant the Lord Nelson should retain its on-site brewhouse in keeping with the pubs of yesteryear.
This is one of the last bastions of what hotels or pubs as we know them were, and we're very proud to retain that tradition.
That tradition envelops drinkers at the Lord Nelson. The original hand-carved sandstone block walls, an ever-present reminder of its colonial heritage. The interior fit-out, unashamedly British.
I lived in the UK for 5 years, and so to me it was a fairly natural step to make this hotel slightly English in its approach.
Blair has worked hard to create an idyllic pub ambience, but it's not entirely essential for the enjoyment of beer. This is the Holland Park Bowling Club, and you won't find any greater beer fans than the Babs Boys, Brisbane's amateur brewers.
Well, let's see how it goes.
Before the all-important tasting of each other's latest brews gets underway, club meetings begin with a spot of shopping.
It's just been heated to kill the germination process.
And then a visit to the library, where hundreds of books and magazines offer insights to brewing the perfect backyard beer. As one of the oldest homebrew clubs in the world, these guys take their craft very seriously. Functions are even catered.
And also, my husband couldn't go home, drive home after tasting beer here, so I'm the chef. We're married to them, we're doggies.
Tonight's discussion focuses on Belgian beers. The club members dutifully sit through the topic of the month, but everyone's thinking the same thing. The tastings can't come quick enough.
The French-speaking part of Belgium
the speakers do it tough, with all that expectation in the room.
Just run through a couple of more bowl. These taste which imparts a silky sensation to the tongue.
At last.
Whose beer is this one?
That worked.
Home brewers will tackle anything from exotic lagers to rich porters and stouts. Things can go wrong along the way.
Oh yeah, occasionally we do get a bad one. We don't drink that one.
We've certainly poured a beer or two down the sink before today.
Would they dare do it to the state champions brew?
These guys here are very critical, so we'll see what they have to say. Come on, guys.
All right, thanks, Ken.
You've got a German Pilsner.
How old is it?
3 weeks old.
I think you're a modern hitter, Ken.
Yep, there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lovely aroma and the flavour follows on.
It's got the Ken Wheaton taste about it, which I love.
Being a judge, it wouldn't get top points.
We've got a bit of hops to smell.
It's a fair evaluation. The head retention could be a lot better, but I'm sure that'll come in time as well.
Home brewers consider themselves fanatics, but not even they come close to beer's most obsessive bunch, can collectors. And the biggest event they've ever staged is about to get underway, the 25th anniversary Canathon. Settled in the mid-19th century, Wagga Wagga grew to become one of Australia's largest inland cities. This weekend, numbers have swollen even more as the town hosts beer can collectors from all over the world. Most of the members of the Australian Beer Can Collectors Association have upwards of 1,000 cans each, and annual trade meetings like this are an invaluable opportunity to finish off collections and start new ones.
A lot of the blokes have to build onto their houses. People have moved houses to keep their collection. I know one of the local members here in Wagga, he had to build a sewing room for his wife so that he could extend as well. She wouldn't let him build unless he got something out of it as well.
Adam and Shirley Murphy have one of the world's largest beer can inventories. They are very familiar with the mindset of the heavy-duty collectors attending the anniversary swap meet.
Most of them collect more than one thing. They might collect beer cans, but they also might collect key rings or coasters or anything related to beer.
I think most people are beer can collectors at heart. It does get harder now to collect beer cans because there's not as many breweries, so a lot of people are diversifying into other breweryana, tap tops, bottles, playing cards with beer on them, glasses, etc.
The one for Laurie Daly, the State of Origin, yep. That can was never released onto the market.
There's not much in the way of beer cans that the Murphys haven't seen. They're hoping their Austrian contact has something worthwhile to swap for Shirley's Harley-Davidson cans.
G'day, Philip. How are you, mate?
Hi, good. How are you?
Good,
Yeah,
good, mate.
good. Nice to see you.
Good to see you again. Okay, I have a couple of cans here from Europe.
Yes.
From Austria, some Germany, Belgium, and also some different
this
countries. That's from Thailand here.
They're lovely.
Just about a couple of months ago.
They're so colourful, aren't they?
Yeah.
All famous tennis stars, yeah. We're all famous tennis stars.
Brilliant sets, nice colours.
Yeah, lovely colours.
If you're interested in that set, maybe we can do a swap.
Oh, that'd be great.
That'd be fine. One of them there is nearly 20 years old. There's some of the early ones. Just did motorcycle cans.
Perfect.
Got those three for those four.
Oh, great. Thanks so much.
We'll buy you beer after.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good on you, mate. Haven't seen these before anyway.
Oh, they'll look great on the shelf.
So the Murphys' collection is now 11,004. From hardcore beer can collectors to passionate home brewers, tour guides, writers, publicans historians and more, Beer Mania has many guises. People from all walks of life, all united by that four-letter word, beer. It's a time-honoured tradition. Men assuming their places around the barbecue, women preferring not to. Soggy coleslaw, tomato thrown on a tired iceberg lettuce masquerading as a salad. Enough beers on hand to satisfy a small battalion.
Anyone up?
And by the time the chefs are done, the meat is barely recognisable.
Almost ready there, love, hey?
Enter Joanne and John Meredith. Two talented young chefs spearheading the fight against barbecue mediocrity.
Welcome to the new age of the barbecue. Today we're grilling some duck breast pieces with some Tatonga pineapple in a white peppercorn and coriander paste. The reason we're using a particular pineapple is
their campaign to take barbecue cooks back to school is part of a gastronomic revolution that has swept beer along in its wake. Adelaide boasts one of the world's great food cultures. The host city of Tasting Australia, a showcase of the nation's best food and wine, has seen a newcomer take centre stage.
Food and wine has long been the sort of, the coupling that people expect. Food and beer, not so much, but we're always eating, new things, and we're trying different cuisines, Thai, Vietnamese, and beer is a perfect marriage with a lot of those foods. And we've got such exceptional beers in this country that I thought, well, let's really expose the public to a taste of Australian beer.
Beer's coming of age in this foodie haven is directly related to the festival director's family history.
And I grew up in Belgium, which is a great beer country, and in fact my father was a brewer and I lived in a brewery, so I have a sort of natural affinity with the stuff.
Blending wine and beer throughout the four-day festival program was a challenge. But Ian insists the two can be happy bedfellows, as they are for many industry practitioners.
What happens after a wine tasting is there's so much, acidity in the wines that they come out with their mouths really puckered, and there's nothing like the cleansing out. It's the same with chefs. At the end of a night shift in the restaurant, the first thing they do, open a can of a good beer.
Many of the high-profile chefs attending the festival confess they all have a soft spot for the amber.
An Irish dish using Guinness, which actually I made up, but it sounds like it's the most authentic thing, which was steak, kidney, oyster and Guinness pie, which was just great. I mean, when you cook it, you long, slow cook beer, the bittiness is sort of attenuated a bit, but it's still there and it gives it a really nice sort of firm back taste, which works a treat.
There are so many bottles of different flavoured beers, whether they're light, crispy,
fresh ales, whether they're big chocolatey, malty stouts and the things in between, the porters, the pilsners. There's so much out there that I thought, why aren't we bringing it into the table? Why aren't we looking at it for its flavour components to seeing what goes with what?
Well, I think that Scottish ale, you know, this is real beer. This is not fizzy beer. This is beer that's got a big kind of hoppy sort of flavour to it. Has a natural affinity with beef.
This new appreciation for the potential of beer's contribution in the kitchen has been taken to the extreme in this busy Melbourne restaurant. Today, as always, the chefs will empty around 60 beers into their pots and pans, and diners can't get enough of them. The Portland Hotel is onto something. The wheat beer steamed mussels with chilli and garlic are a big mover.
It's served with coriander, served lemon, chilli and a little bit of garlic. Let them steam naturally in their own juice before I deglaze the pan with the beer. We're learning every day about what we can do with the different characteristics of the beer, the flavours of it. Got a lot more leeway. The more styles of beer there are, the more you can do, and there's more beer than there is wine. Water caramel sauce we use for our desserts. Just basically beer, sugar, cook it all out. Serve it with a chocolate tart.
Devising the menu has been largely a process of trial and error. So what's the reaction been like to creations like lamb shanks braised in amber ale with a parsnip puree?
So far, really, really good. Customers are really taking to it. They're getting educated as we have to cooking with beer and actually drinking beer right the way through their meals, as opposed to wines. We're matching the food with the beer, and we're cooking with the beer as well.
In bringing beer back to the table and the conscience down under, chefs at the Portland are doing little more than rewriting colonial history.
One of the reasons why it would be odd if beer had not been a common item of production in the colony is that it was such a common item of consumption in Britain. Beer was a staple part of the British diet, and in particular of the English diet. The product seemed to be particularly popular with native-born settlers rather than with those who had recently come from England. It seems that even very early in the settlement of Australia, there was the development of a distinctive Australian taste in beer.
That taste has evolved again. With hundreds of full-bodied, flavoursome beers available today, diners and restaurateurs are reconsidering the ancient brew's gastronomic worth. Wine is suddenly no longer an automatic choice at mealtimes. Beer and food matching has become a buzz topic among Epicureans. Brewers of premium beers in particular are working hard to once again position their products as worthy contenders to wine.
Beer got pushed off the table. People were convinced that it wasn't acceptable to drink beer with a meal. And so we reached this ridiculous point where we love Asian foods as Australians, and spicy Asian foods, and we're drinking wines with them which are incompatible in most instances. Beer is the perfect drink.
At barbecues, it has never been under threat. When two young chefs set up their own cooking school above a thriving Providore centre, they earmarked barbecues and beer as a key area to kickstart the business. The young Queenslanders were also trained in beer appreciation and have incorporated beer matching into their barbecue classes.
Welcome to the new age of the barbecue. Today we're grilling some duck breast pieces with some Batonga pineapple in a white peppercorn and coriander paste. The reason we're using this combination of flavours today is the salty, the garlic and the peppery flavour of the marinade on the duck is matched beautifully with the sweetness of the Buthonga pineapple. The reason we're using a particular pineapple as the Buthonga, it's very, very low in acid, meaning that the sugar and the sweetness comes through in the pineapple, which cuts, as I said before, that salty, strong, pungent flavour of the white peppercorn and coriander marinade that's over the duck breast. For the New Age Barbie, we obviously need a New Age beer to kind of accompany that. I'm recommending the Hoegaarden. It's a Belgian wheat beer style. And the reasons, or some of the reasons that it works so well with this particular dish, the dish itself is Thai or Asian inspired, and this is actually the flavours that come through with the Hoegaarden are typically citrus with a little bit of coriander seed at the end.
In a country where lager is far and away the most popular style of beer and drinkers rarely stray from it, the taste of a cloudy wheat beer is often a first. And that's exactly what John hopes when he prepares the beer list. New ways of preparing food and new beers to accompany the flavours, all part of the school experience. And if the size of crowds attending the beer and barbecue sessions at Tasting Australia are any indication, the school curriculum is right on the money. Beer and barbecues have never been more popular among foodies, even if the views of the experts are not.
Women can't cook barbecues. That's the problem. They just plain bloody can't do it. They don't understand the principle of it. They don't understand that you only use one hand and your other hand you got your beer, and you know, they can't understand all that. They're too clean and tidy, they clean things up afterwards and all that. And I think that's it. I actually thought I was going to have to be escorted out of Adelaide at one stage when I said a woman wasn't allowed near the barbecue. Beer in hand.
Italian-born Vince Gareffa calls himself the butcher to the stars.
Your butcher is still happy as long as you're eating meat. The day he sees you toasting a bit of aubergine on the barbecue, he's going to have coronary. But let's look at the evolution. And you might too if you don't.
Even in esteemed company, Vince's opinions are always keenly sought.
Prawns on a barbecue are just to die for. That's just the most sexy, the most erotic aromas that come through. Vince, honestly, prawns on the barbie, just wonderful, honestly.
A shish kebab is erotic. A spare rib is erotic.
You mean the Italian sausages? Yeah, sorry.
Just like there's been a change in my client's attitude to what he's cooking, he has changed to what he's drinking. And beer seems to go much better with a lot of the stronger flavours that we're dealing with at barbecues, and the variety that is being offered is making him not only a connoisseur of the different meats, but a connoisseur of the different beers.
The marinade we're using today is a really, really simple marinade, Mediterranean flavoured. It's basing on some nice extra virgin olive oil or just some even virgin olive oil, and using fresh garlic, sliced fresh cloves of garlic, with some fresh thyme, some fresh rosemary, and a little bit of sea salt and cracked black pepper. Always place food down and away, so if it's going to splash up, it's going to splash up but away from you, so it's not going to splash back on you.
Places like the James Street Cooking School are certainly helping raise the level of respect for beer around mealtimes. But barbecues are by no means the end of the culinary road for the ancient brew's new appeal.
People are familiar with beer and they're used to seeing beer in the socialising context, and as it becomes, I guess, more interesting in the dining situation, we're actually seeing the hospitality people starting to respond by bringing out beer lists.
The texture of the pate is wonderfully smooth, and you've got the yeasty, toasty characters that will be eating the pate off the toast. So what sort of beer?
A nice malty ale, something nice and smooth and mellow and creamy on the palate.
Multi-award-winning chef Tim Pak Poi is an uncompromising Epicurean. Quality is everything, and beer is no different.
My interest is in flavour, the pursuit of flavour. Flavour being the combination of taste and scent. It's the five senses, really. Beer, to me, is another part of the gastronomic life. It's nutritious, it's delicious, it enriches my life. I enjoy wines, I enjoy cordials. We make our own cordials from lychees and all sorts of things. We cook with beer. We do some unusual things with beer. It's another age-old food that we have so much fun with.
Tim is preparing his new season beer list and has asked brewmaster Bill Taylor to help match styles with various dishes.
I like to taste the beer first.
Yeah, I did that too.
Set my palate, know what I'm about to expect. Then I come back to the food and taste, and then I look for the combination of the two and see how they work together.
It's a good clean taste in the pate. It's very smooth, very clean, no hint of bitterness that sometimes you do get with particularly with smaller birds, pigeons. I do notice with the Becks, it's pulling the seasoning out of it's boosting the pepper in the pate, which I really like. Making beer is very similar to cooking. It is probably the oldest recipe known to man, and you actually cook to make beer. What have we got here?
Nicely balanced beer.
Bill is one of the world's leading authorities on beer and its relationship to food.
How does does bitterness work with chili?
Capsaicin, the fire from chili, lingers on the palate. It causes pain, in effect. The bubbles bursting on the tongue. It's almost like a scouring action, massaging the tongue. The alcohol helps to dissolve, but the interesting thing is the bitterness. The bitterness buries at the back of the palate in the very coarse taste buds, and it lingers, it hangs on and stands up and challenges the capsaicin, which is also there. So you've actually got something left on the palate. Long after you've swallowed, put the food down and the beer, the tussle still goes on the palate. Beer is getting back onto the table because diners are really experiencing so much more these days. There's so many different ingredients, there's so many styles of cooking, and this is part of an educational experience for diners. They're learning to trust their taste buds, they're experimenting more, and this includes experimenting with beer. So we're seeing people getting out there and enjoying the refreshing qualities of beer, but waking up to the fact that there's flavour there as well. So people are starting to take beer more seriously. They're looking for different styles, they're looking for different flavours, and they're working out that beer works well with flavours that come from the kitchen.
Back at school, lessons are almost over for the day. But John saves his most important until last. Cooking fish on the barbie has been the undoing of many a backyard chef.
The fundamentals of cooking seafood, or cooking fish fillets in particular, that a lot of people do tend to overlook, is a nice clean grill. That's one thing that people don't really appreciate or take into account. If you don't have a nice clean barbecue to start with, your end product is going to be nothing less than kind of disappointing. So once again, away from myself. So you get that nice sizzle. If you don't have that nice sizzle, it's too cold. And all it's going to do, as soon as you put that piece of fish on the grill, it's going to stick. Okay, so
John's #1 beverage tip is to reach for a beer whenever food has an Asian influence. This blue-eyed cod with mango, cucumber and capsicum salsa is a perfect match with a Belgian blonde beer. After a full day of beer and barbecue school, the students walk away with a completely new regard for that most familiar of drinks. When it comes to beer and food, the wine buffs of Adelaide have an even bigger shock coming their way. Spreading the word about beer's gastronomic worth has been a 20-year campaign for Chuck Hahn, one of the world's great brewers.
I remember my first introduction to an Australian 7-course meal. It was a meat pie and a 6-pack. So we've gone a bit far from that now, and we actually have charts. And if you look on your diagram, we actually are able to visually see the different flavors in the beers. And we basically have the dark-colored ales over to light-colored ales, and then on your right side, the light.
Chuck's beer education evenings begin with an overview of what beer styles fit where on the flavour spectrum. And before the food comes out, he reveals the sacred art of professional beer tasting.
So everyone swirl it around like this to release those volatiles. and put your nose down in. And then as you taste it, what I want you to do is swirl it around in your mouth and then swallow with your mouth slightly open. So it looks something like this. Everyone watch me now. And you see, as you bathe your taste buds with beer and air at the same time, it brings all those beautiful flavors forward on the palate. Isn't that nice?
It's this new sophistication surrounding beer that has taken many by surprise at Tasting Australia. After 4 days of sampling some of the nation's finest foods, beer and wine, speakers and authors, foodies were asked to digest one last unexpected fact about beer and its suitability to an old wine staple.
So many people think wine and cheese, but beer and cheese to me has been one of the great discoveries.
In the Beer Masterclass, 4 beers are matched with 4 cheeses. Pilsner with cheddar, lager with brie, ale with washed rind cheese and stout with blue. It's a first-time experience for most.
We encourage you to get to taste the cheese and let it ripen and develop the smells, and don't be afraid of the smells. A brie, for example, will give off, as it gets older, some ammoniated smells. Often people will say, Helen, I bought a brie and I think it's off because it smells. And I'd say, hallelujah, it's alive and well, it's fabulous, love it. Because I often say, peel the rind back. Don't eat the rind, because that's been doing all the hard work. But people sort of think they're being robbed because it was part of the weight of the cheese. Get over it.
Beer and cheese share a similar chemical makeup. Both are the product of fermentation of sugar by yeasts and bacteria, and both were accidental, naturally occurring discoveries, processes later harnessed by human ingenuity. For the festival goers, the facts come thick and fast.
Now, blue cheese should not burn your palate.
Lager's only been around since the mid-1800s.
How a washed rind was created by the Trappist monks.
Beer is a natural product, it does stale.
Ales and cheese have accompanied each other since the days of ancient Egypt and Rome, when they were staples of diet along with other fermented products like mead and wine. As a cheese platter alternative to wine, however, it's very early days in public education.
That marries beautifully, I think, with those toasty notes as well that has come out of the beer.
We're moving into stout, and the origination of the name stout comes from a beer style in London in the 1700s known as porter. And they made a strong one called stout porter. 7.4% alcohol. Some people go, wow, when they hear that, but in fact, that's not much more than the Chardonnay, is it really? So let's put it in perspective. But with alcohol comes flavour. When the yeast starts fermenting.
Flavour is the key word driving beer's rise in the gastronomic stakes. As a component of modern cuisine, or as an alternative to wine in the best restaurants, the world's oldest recipe has come of age as a serious accompaniment to food. Something much more than a standard accessory at an overcooked barbecue. The imagery of hands-on family companies producing regional specialty wines has always struck a chord with consumers. Wine buffs are happy to pay a premium for the best boutique wines, and now that attitude has spread across the gastronomic spectrum. With their low-yield, high-quality products, small regional producers are meeting the demands of a more sophisticated marketplace, and beer has joined the queue. Small breweries offering unique, full-flavoured, full-bodied beers.
We're not so stuff-shirt about beer, and we don't wander on about these ethereal tastes of forest floor and freshly exercised horse. Generally, people love something different, and that's why you go to a microbrewery.
It's boom time for handcrafted beers. Microbrewing has endured a rocky road throughout the past 2 decades. High taxes and not enough accomplished brewers to go around have hindered the industry's growth. But riding on the back of a new generation of more adventurous palates seeking new and bold flavours, microbreweries are tipped to become the next big thing in beer. To meet the anticipated demand for handcrafted beers, several tertiary institutions are offering students degree courses in brewing.
Yes, at this university we're training brewers and they're going into the microbrewing industry, but what we need is a greater critical mass of microbrewers before it does impact on the public. The microbrewers are pushing the boundaries of beer. They are willing to try something a little bit different in much smaller quantities that the bigger brewers couldn't do. So from a microbrewer's perspective, it's much easier to produce 500, 600 or 1,000 litres of a wood-aged vanilla porter, for argument's sake, and then sell that to the people coming to their outlet. We're finding new players in the game, we're finding new suppliers in the game, and new ideas and obviously new breweries.
The concentration of those new breweries occurs in the unlikeliest of environments. Where the river meets the sea, Margaret River is one of Australia's premium wine growing regions. And taking the industry head on, more and more microbreweries are moving into the area. The multi-award winning Bootleg Brewery cheekily claims it is a beer oasis in a desert of wine. It is one of the key players behind beer's successful push into the heart of world-class wine country.
As a brewer and a person who lives amongst wineries, I find myself reading tasting notes of wines and not intentionally bringing that back to my work. My palate becomes a lot more trained in regards to tasting, and the vocabulary and the descriptions of our beers, we tend to use a lot more sort of open terms.
Of its 6 beers on tap, the brewery's Pilsner has earned most accolades, but there is one beer in particular that sets Bootleg apart.
We have a beer what we call Raging Bull, which is a dark ale. Some people class it as a porter and others have even said it's a stout, 7.1%. One of the most unique beers being made at the moment. Most people take that beer home. It's sort of a beer you can't sort of drink a lot of here at the brewery. You'll take a 6-pack home.
At the core of the Bull's unique flavour is the closely guarded quantities of the 4 malts that create its full-bodied, chocolatey character. Brewer Craig Simons takes considerable care measuring out the portions of British roast and chocolate malts and the Australian pale and crystal varieties that go into every batch of Raging Bull. He will spend almost 2 hours milling the grain. The brew will take a further 9. Fermenting lasts for 3 days, settling for 2, and after a week in a keg, Raging Bull is ready. The beer is popular with visiting wine buffs who are accustomed to challenging their palates.
I'm not really putting a beer on the table to make them happy. I'm putting one on to make me happy, and I tend to find they like it when I like it. Finding out age groups from 18 to 65, a good beer is, everybody enjoys a good beer, and that's my job, is to make a good beer.
Part of the appeal of microbreweries is that the brewers themselves are hands-on at every stage of the process. They have absolute freedom to try whatever techniques and blends they desire. When husband and wife team Scott and Amanda Morgan decided to enter the world of microbrewing, they opted to make a name for themselves with niche market European-style beers.
The first one we've produced is a German alt beer. It comes from a recipe based in Dusseldorf. Being a minnow in the industry, we were sort of looking at a smaller, pointier end of the market as opposed to the large lager market. We found there's a fair bit more to the marketing than there was to the brewing side of it, to tell you the truth.
After the initial setup costs and then the challenge of getting the beer into the market, the hurdles are significant. Passion is the main requirement of a start-up microbrewery owner.
I think it has to be. I think probably most people would throw in the towel. Scott does a lot of outside work. He's a diesel mechanic by trade, so he tends to do a lot of mechanical work outside of the brewery. I'm actually have held off other jobs, including filling shelves at Coles at night. I'm still an ambulance officer in this region.
Undaunted by the challenges ahead, the Morgans are uncompromising in their quest to brew high-end beers. Their second is an unfiltered, unpasteurised wheat beer.
I thought the Hefeweizen may have appealed to some of the wine buffs with the wine palate. It's quite a sophisticated, not typical beer flavour to the Hefeweizen, where it doesn't have the bitterness, it turns slightly sour. Not too sure what the regular beer drinker makes of it.
That commitment to challenging traditional styles drives most microbrewers, but it doesn't necessarily mean they can't be commercially viable. One small brewery claimed international gold medal success in its first year, thanks largely to one clever variation on the brewing process. Fremantle, a port city with a proud colonial heritage. It is also home to one of the country's first microbreweries and one of its most successful. The Sail and Anchor has been re-educating beer drinkers for 150 years.
I guess the way to explain it is if you thought that the be-all and end-all of wine was Fruity Lexia, well then you wouldn't sort of go and explore the rest of the wines on offer. So with beer it's very much the same. There's a whole wide range of styles of beers with different aromas, tastes, complexity and texture. And really what we do is we provide an offering and a range. And what it's about for us is expanding people's minds and palates. And you know, once you stretch someone onto a new idea or a new taste, they just don't go back. They're never the same again.
By brewing beer in such close proximity to those who pay for it, pub brewers can ill afford to slip up.
If you go into the brewery and you're having a bad day, well, that's going to come out in your beer. There's so many steps along the way where you can come to grief, and each beer has its own personality, and essentially we massage these beers and we sort of grow with them.
Richard says he is happy to stay pub brewing for two reasons.
Flexibility in product range. So, you know, if we decide that, well, hey, we've got a beer that we want to change or we want to put a seasonal beer in, we can do that and it's not a major issue for us. Whereas a large brewery, they've got production runs, They've got a lot more sort of pressures on them to get their product around the country just in time, and I guess that for them provides them with a degree of inflexibility. So that's why we like microbreweries.
And on an ever-increasing scale, so do the public. And there is one small brewery the real connoisseurs have embraced well ahead of the rest.
I don't think it's just about wine drinkers going across to this sort of beer. It's about ordinary beer drinkers coming up.
Little Creatures Brewery was an overnight sensation when it launched in 2000. Drawing its inspiration from the US craft beer market, the company focused on one key flavour attribute for its signature pale ale.
Yes, one of the big differences between ourselves and most brewers is the lengths we go to get the hop aroma into the beer, and for that purpose we use these whole hop flowers as opposed to pellets.
The Cascade and Chinook flowers require their own special quarantine permit for importation from Oregon. Held in a basket like a giant tea bag, the flowers are submerged in the unfermented brew, infusing the pale ale with distinctive citrus, grapefruit and passion fruit notes. The end result is a hugely successful beer, but Howard and his team must still overcome the daily challenge of every small brewery.
Make it great and make it great again. If there's inconsistency in the quality or the profile too much, I mean, it's, you know, it's handcrafted, it's batch brewed, so you do get some variation, but ultimately you're looking for, you know, some sort of consistent product.
While Little Creatures has enjoyed a fairy tale start in the craft beer market, Howard concedes the beers aren't for everybody.
I think if you're a dyed-in-the-wool lager drinker and you're fairly closed-minded, I think, you know, it's hard and probably fairly polarising, and I think the perception is, you know, it's very hard to drink a lot of it. But then I think if you are talking to people who have been through the wine market, or coffee drinkers, or people who are into olives, or whatever it is, then I think it's acceptable, and in fact they fall in love with it.
And meeting those Epicureans head-on, the Boatshed Cum Brewery also houses a busy restaurant that offers modern dishes that complement the new age beers. It's a world away from the traditional pub atmosphere of the place that pioneered microbrewing in Australia. The historic George V Inn. Publican Jeff Shara still lives by the creed that his German mentors preached when they helped him establish the brewery.
Don't bother about wholesaling. Just sell from your own pub. Just be that good that people will come from far and wide to drink the perfect drink.
Jeff's massive beer bottle collection leaves no doubt about where he thinks the perfect drink emanates from. All his beers are made according to the Reinheitsgebot principles, Bavarian laws about beer making that stretch back to the Middle Ages. The natural, unfiltered processing means the shelf life of the beers is very short. None can travel too far.
Unless it goes in a refrigerator container in a couple of days and it's consumed within a week. This is not that sort of product. That's the problem. So I'm almost non-commercial.
A fourth-generation publican of German and Swiss lineage, Jeff is very particular about honouring the family traditions in his pub brewery. He imported a craftsman-built brass and copper kettle from Germany to ensure his lagers and bocks were brewed in conditions as close as possible to the Bavarian traditions. This pioneer of pub brewing says the thing that keeps him going is the constant stream of enlightened drinkers who sample his brews for the first time.
After 16 years, we're still discovering that people are surprised by the fact that beer has flavour.
International visitors to Australia seeking the most acclaimed beer flavours the country has to offer, make a pilgrimage to the national capital. It's a premium beer fix most Australians don't even know about.
We seem to be better known in this establishment overseas than we are even in the local Canberra community. We've had people come to Australia to come to the Wigan Pen. We've been on American television, in the American Beer Magazine, the magazine of the campaign for real ale in Britain. We get a lot of tourists who come to Canberra to experience the range of beers that we have here.
With a background in wine, microbiology and Canberra bureaucracy, Lockie McComish made the leap of faith to beer with the Wigan Pen Tavern and Brewery, thanks to his passion for home brewing. Employing the best home brewers he could find and offering them the freedom to tackle challenging beer styles, Lockie's strategy paid off. The Wigan Pen has won countless awards for its beers. But despite his success, Lockie can't offer much of an insight to any aspiring pub brewers.
There are a few models because there are very few people who are actually trained and capable, unfortunately, of producing a high quality product. The history of the small brewing industry in this country over the last 20 years has been a very sad one. I think roughly one small brewery in 10 survives about 3 years or longer.
One of the keys to the Wigan Pen's longevity is the former mining engineer who switched careers to take up craft brewing professionally.
Richard is, I would argue, the best small brewer in the country.
Oh, I think that's a fairly big title to live up to, but if I'm not there yet, I'm certainly getting close to it. The Wigan Pen is certainly the most innovative small brewery in Australia in terms of the number of beer styles that it chooses to do. We also only sell the beers we make, so I guess we've got to be doing something right.
We get some really quite extraordinary reactions. People are very surprised by the range of flavours in the beer, from the fruit esters, the banana flavour in the wheat beer, through to the coriander and orange peel flavours in the wit beer, right the way through to the intense fruit and bitterness in the real ales. We find people do react at first with some surprise. By and large, if we can convince them to have a few glasses of the beer, they will be, as it were, hooked.
Getting hooked on beer has been a distinctly Australian condition. We visit the pub where it all began. By necessity born of isolation, the first small breweries in Australia were inevitably the remote taverns and inns that were always among the first buildings erected in new settlements. The oldest continually licensed inn still standing is in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales, a region first charted in 1798 by explorers gathering information for Governor Hunter, who was keen to dissuade convicts from fleeing south from Sydney. 3 decades after the first Europeans entered the Highlands, construction began on the Surveyor General Inn.
The pub was built in 1834 by the convicts at the time. All the sandstone and everything was all done by them, and it was built the year before the jail. There's a lot of staff over the years that swear that there is a ghost in the place. In fact, before the jail was built, in that 1 year period, there was a holding cell downstairs in the cellar. It's actually got all the bars on the windows, and it was a proper lockup for bushrangers and so forth. And the story goes that one of them died down in that cell while they were waiting to be picked up and carted to either Sydney or Melbourne. And so, you know, there is talk that he's the ghost. Some people have said they get shivers up their spine when they go down into the cell. The first hanging in Australia was done up the road here at the courthouse. Her name was Lucretia Dunkley. She murdered her husband and she was hanged up the road here. And again, there's another ghost that people talk about floating around the village. She might be one that's here too, I don't know. I'm a sceptic, so they say skeptics don't find out.
Brewing beer at the time many of the taverns like the Surveyor General Inn were built was enormously difficult due to the poor ingredients available. But at least the early brewers of the Highlands had temperature on their side. pioneers pushing into Queensland, the searing heat made for rough brews. But the pubs they created left a permanent mark on our enjoyment of beer. Wide verandas and airy balconies would become the hallmarks of the iconic Australian pub. Curiously, the most famous pub in Queensland, though, defies that tradition. Brisbane's Breakfast Creek Hotel is a fusion of architectural styles. Something more akin to French Renaissance than classic Queenslander. Beyond the facade is another new microbrewery. The pub's own handcrafted lager. Brewed with pale malt and the ubiquitous Pride of Ringwood hops, the lager is allowed extended maturation before it is offered at the bar. But it's a rival product that keeps regulars coming back to the creek. It's the only place in the state offering beer off the wood daily. In the late 1970s, the changeover from wood to steel kegs was met with derision by the wharfies who frequented the pub. They believed the taste of their beloved 4X had changed overnight. They petitioned the brewery and the government. Their case was put to Parliament, and finally the brewer, Castlemaine Perkins, decreed the Breakfast Creek Hotel would retain the wooden kegs. Established hotels and breweries everywhere are taking a keen interest in the growing appreciation of traditional brewing methods and the rise of the craft brewers. With more university graduates joining accomplished home brewers and industry professionals moving into microbrewing, the diversity of beer flavours in future will only continue to widen. And there is a growing market of new age beer palates waiting to be challenged. After days spent searching for the ideal landing place in what he called the finest harbour in the world, Captain Arthur Phillip finally went ashore on January 26, 1788, and proclaimed England's colonial outpost would be called Sydney. The Union Jack was hoisted, glasses of porter were raised, and success to the colony was the toast. Modern Australia was founded on a beer. Beer is part of the Australian way of life, a fact that is universally recognised. When Queensland's 4X first launched in the UK, it reinforced those perceptions with its advertising. Laconic Aussies love their beer.
So there's going to be a few of you out sharing this time then?
About 40, I'd reckon.
Something for the ladies?
Oh, yeah. 2 bottles of sweet cherry, mate. like we've overdone it with the sherry.
Yeah. Australians wouldn't give a Castlemaine 4X for anything else.
That once archetypal beer drinker no longer reflects a rapidly changing Australian beer culture. The new generation of beer drinkers has embraced the much wider flavour spectrum now on offer. It's a fiercely competitive and still evolving marketplace. But regardless of where the future ultimately lies for beer, the experts say the fundamentals of making it will never change.
Look, at the end of the day, all beers are produced by, let's call it, a natural fermentation process. There's no such thing as chemical brewing or instantaneous brewing. It's the yeast that do the job, it's the yeast that do the work. In terms of the taste, if anything, we might find some improvement in terms of the stability of the product, the capacity to stabilise those flavours and aromas under very difficult climatic conditions in this country. The issue of heat and age and light, they're real problems for the brewers, and technology will assist us in preventing those problems from occurring.
The future will also see the current interest in quality beers continue to grow.
People are travelling more, they're trying more things, they're looking for different experiences, and it's where we get that is in that premium end of the market.
To cash in on the future of beer's growing popularity, Frank Burgess is in the right place at the right time. As the nation's #1 independent beer importer, his is a 15-year overnight success story.
We bring our beers from all over the world. We've got Chimay, for example, from Belgium. Behind there you've got Yanjing, which we bring from China. We've got beers, Raddles from England. We bring them in from the States. We have them in Indonesia. Wherever we feel that there's a possibility of enticing the palate.
Enticing the palate is a good deal easier now than when this New Caledonian-born Australian first began importing.
When we originally started, we were bringing in cans for collectors. Nobody ever drank the beers that we were bringing in. We've seen in the last 5 years our business growing by about 20 to 25% every year. It is growing actually probably faster than what the pundits thought.
European beers are fueling growth and winning Frank and his team international recognition for their efforts in expanding the market.
We started importing Belgian beers up as far back as 15 years ago, and we had a small clientele, very select, and it's built up over the years. Through our efforts, probably going back a few years, I was giving away that many free samples just to get people to taste different beers. That recently I was requested by the Belgian Brewers Guild to join that guild, and they flew me across into Belgium last year in September and asked me to join the knighthood that they have over there, which obviously I did. And I was actually the first non-brewer to be invited to join the knighthood.
No surprise then that Frank rates Belgian beers the best of the best.
Without any doubt. Without any doubt. They also have more diversity than any other country in the world. Other countries such as Czechoslovakia, for example, probably brew the best Pilsner in the world, but that's all they do. Whereas Belgium, you can go from fruit beers to lagers to ales. They certainly have the diversity that no other country has.
With growing imports, an expanding boutique beer market and rising sales of premium beers among the major brewers, diversity is a luxury enjoyed here also. We're about to reveal why plenty of people are already willing to pay $28 a bottle for the ultimate nectar. As the beer landscape continues to evolve with our growing appreciation and understanding, one-time niche markets are becoming mainstream.
Now people are starting to take a little notice and to realise that there are different beers out there, and you only have to look around town. You know, every town's got a Belgian beer cafe these days, and an Irish pub, and a this and a that, and people go to them and drink the different beers.
The oldest traditions of alehouse drinking are emulated throughout the world in places like the Lovenbroich Keller.
The pool in which we fish has grown dramatically, particularly over the last 3 to 4 years. We're about teaching and encouraging people to appreciate the appearance of beer, to observe it, to pay attention to aroma characteristics, and to palate structure, and importantly the aftertaste in beer. And we find that once we talk people through this process and line up a flight of some very well-known lager-style beers, they are blown away.
Germany boasts over 30% of the world's breweries, churning out hundreds of different beers, but malty lagers are its mainstay. Despite the diversity on offer, all German beers have one thing in common.
The Reinheitsgebot is a purity pledge that dates back to 1516. It ensures that some very basic and natural ingredients are only used in the production of beer in Germany. They are malt, hops, yeast and water. It's a consumer protection law. It's a guarantee that there are no flavour enhancers used.
While it may be restrictive in some ways, Reinheitsgebot is generally regarded as a highly marketable asset for German beers. And of course, the other thing that sets them apart is the way they are consumed. Drinking a litre of beer at a time can take some getting used to.
The Steins, commonly referred to as a Mass, the 1 litre. In one way, it's the only way to drink beer. It really puts you in Munich. Despite the increased in-glass temperature, as you get to the bottom third, let's say, the beers are still really drinkable.
The most ardent German beer fans can join the Keller's Beer Club.
We offer an authentic ceramic Stein. The tin lid is engraved with their name and membership number. We keep them here on display, but it's theirs to drink from whenever they come in.
Member number 100 is none other than the Keller's own beer expert.
One of our unique things in the Lovenbroich Keller is our mango wheat beer. It's a wheat beer with a dash of mango on the top. It gives a nice fruity character. Wheat beer itself is very full of vitamin B12. It has a lot of beer yeast inside, which cleans the blood and gives the young skin. For example, I drink every night a liter, so that's the result you can see.
Germany's great European rival for beer supremacy is Belgium, and now this tiny nation too is spreading its own gospel internationally through Belgian beer cafes, surprising drinkers who thought they knew beer.
They're quite surprised and very happy about it because it's totally different than the beer found in Australia. So at the end of the day, we basically showing a different product and a different style of beer than what we've got available in a country. And having that is just always like a new discovery.
Olivier Massart is one of the pioneers of Belgian beer cafes. He says being something of an aficionado is almost a birthright for all Belgians.
Well, it comes from a very early age. I mean, we're talking now. In the first brewery, basically in Belgium was in 1070. So we're talking just even before the first crusade. So beer has been in Belgium for many, many years, and it's been a culture since. Basically started from the monks. The monks started making beers in Belgium for various reasons, and basically one of the reasons was the fact that there was a lot of fighting between clans and between tribes, and they were basically poisoning the rivers. And to create a fermentation, they were actually saving the water and making something not as strong maybe than the beer we're drinking now, but making something available for people without being poisoned.
From such humble beginnings rose what is widely regarded as the beer lovers' capital of the world, offering everything from whole fruit beers to lambic styles fermented by wild yeasts.
Being Belgium, you're always in the beer industry one way or another. My godfather used to own 5 breweries and a few pubs as well, and I'll always sort of starting from a young age drinking beer, I shouldn't say that, but we basically sort of adapt to a palate, and it's also part of of life in Belgium. We sort of get an access quickly on beers, and we start appreciating for a very young age, and we sort of our palate adapted to different variety of beer. We have also about 850 different beers in Belgium, 450 breweries. We're very lucky in a country which is about, I'd say, 200 times smaller than Australia to have so much variety all around us.
For the ultimate taste of Belgium, the true connoisseurs reach for one beer in particular.
Here we basically have one of the best beer in the world, and that beer is actually made by the Trappist monks in Belgium in a small monastery. It's actually called the Abbey of Schoolmont, which is about 35 kilometers away from the French border. That beer has been made the same way since the 13th century. It's also sort of a very strong full-bodied beer, about 9% of alcohol. So we're talking about something here which is very, very, very sort of intense in flavor, which have an amazing definition on the hops and the different sort of aromatic herbs that they're using to create the beer. As good as any wine, $28 bottle. Now, also the things in Belgium about beers, we always serve also our beers in different glasses. Particularly this one here, all monastery beers or beer made by the monks are always served in a chalices glass. Santé.
The most resilient exported beer experience is the Irish pub. Recreating the unrivaled ambience of the real thing is the primary focus of all its offspring worldwide. Daniel Gray manages the PJ O'Brien's hotels in Australia. He believes there are a few key factors behind the universal success of the Irish pub.
The biggest thing I think is that atmosphere. It's such a warm atmosphere, everyone feels welcome. Everyone's happy. I mean, all types can be in the Irish pubs. You know, you got your suits that come in, the builders off the street, the traveller comes in, the old person from down the street who comes in for his one pint of the day. Everyone's sort of welcoming, and I think it's that sort of community sort of spirit that has enabled, like, you know, an Irish sort of pub to keep going, and it's just, they're still so popular now.
To keep the atmosphere as close as he can to the real thing, Daniel only employs Irish bar staff, and all the fittings and decor were shipped in from Ireland. And of course, at the heart of a great Irish pub is pouring the perfect Guinness. Ireland is the only country in the world where stout is the most popular beer style, and Irish tourists are very wary about its bona fides anywhere else.
We're trying to change that perception, and by serving quality Guinness, you know, a lot of pubs around, they'll serve Guinness, but unless they're serving a large quantity of it, you know, it comes down to Kilkenny as well and Harp, other Irish lagers as well, it's not going to be at the quality that it needs to be.
Quality control, perfect presentation, and an uncompromising attitude. It's all part of the beer revolution. Our Insider's Guide to Beer began with an insight into the magical ingredient that gives the ancient brew its characteristic bitterness and aromas.
When you break the cone open, it looks like pollen, but it's not actually pollen. They're tiny little sacs of alpha acid, and that is the component that the brewers are extracting or using to bitter the beer.
We've learnt that the body in beer comes from the barley, grown in sun-drenched fields. After it's harvested, the grain is steeped in water, its germination revitalised under controlled conditions. In giant ovens, the barley is roasted to varying levels required for different beer styles. The organism that kick-starts fermentation, tiny yeast cells, are invisible to the naked eye.
What yeast does is convert sugar to ethanol, alcohol, and carbon dioxide.
The fourth and final ingredient is water, rich in minerals. When all four ingredients are combined, the fine art of brewing continues in the manner it has for centuries. First, the malted barley is cracked. It is then mixed with water in a mash tun. The malt extract is known as wort. After it is filtered through the grain husks, the wort is sent to the brew kettle, where hops are added to the boil. On its way to the fermenter, where the yeast will be added, the brew is cooled. The beer then undergoes maturation, and finally it is filtered, ready for bottling.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our beer appreciation dinner tonight.
The new regard for beer as a beverage worthy of serious culinary consideration is attracting a new crowd, eager to learn and eager to experiment. We've seen how even the way we pour a beer is being re-evaluated.
The general presentation of a beer goes something like this. The typical tilt, pour and foam, almost as an afterthought. I like to present beer a little bit differently. So rather than tilting the glass, I actually pour the foam in, keep the glass vertical. And my motto is, let's create the foam at the bottom of the glass. I wait for half a minute, maybe 3/4 of a minute, and I let that foam settle. The beer is draining away from the foam is becoming more dense. It's almost crusting slightly, becoming drier, becoming more stable. So that when I go back to the beer and I top it up, you'll see a very different type of foam in the glass. So as I pour in now and bring the beer to the top of the glass, I have a foam that sits just a little proud of the glass. The bubbles are lovely and...
From one brewmaster to another, we've learned from the experts how to truly appreciate the taste of beer.
Swirl it around like this to release those volatiles and put your nose down in. And then as you taste it, what I want you to do is swirl it around in your mouth and then swallow with your mouth slightly open. So it looks something like this. Everyone watch me now. And you see, as you bathe your taste buds with beer and air at the same time, it brings all those beautiful flavors forward on the palate. Isn't that nice?
While the public is quickly learning to savour beer in a whole new light, the professionals use the same techniques to judge beer with all the sophistication and in-depth analysis of their wine judging counterparts. It is a little known but deadly serious business, with millions of dollars at stake for the winning breweries.
We actually have 3 points for style, 3 points for technical quality. We have 3 points for appearance. The two that really carry weight in excess of 50% of the total score are the aroma and the flavour.
Flavour is the key word that sums up the Renaissance. Beer is regaining its place at the dining table, and among the new generation of drinkers, no visit to cooking school is complete without a beer and food matching session as well.
The dish itself is Thai or
Bistro chefs too have discovered beer and are using it as an integral flavour component of modern cuisine. At some of the most sophisticated eateries, beer is offered as a genuine alternative to wine. Its complexities and flavour characteristics treated with the same respect.
Beer is getting back onto the table because diners are really experiencing so much more these days. There's so many different ingredients, there's so many styles of cooking, and this is part of an educational experience for diners.
Across all spectrums, food and beer are forging a new direction for the ancient brew. From around 6000 BC, organised brewing began using the basic principles that still apply. The magical combination of malt, hops, yeast and water still appeals to our taste buds more than any other. Beer is the world's favourite drink.